Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here with us. We are jumping straight into week 5 of our NGO management program, and this time we're doing a deep dive into program design and the project cycle. So if you've ever found yourself wondering how the actual gears of international development turn behind the scenes, well, you're in exactly the right place.
Okay, let's dive into this with what might just be the biggest question in the entire field. How do NGOs actually take all those great intentions and turn them into real, measurable impact? I mean, it is the fundamental challenge of international aid, isn't it? It's not just about wanting to do good. It's about structuring that goodwill into a concrete, reliable engine that actually changes lives on the ground.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Defining true community needs. 2. Frameworks for strategic change. 3. The project cycle stages. 4. Participatory design and power. 5. Integrating crucial perspectives. And finally, 6. Rights and community ownership. Let's get right to it. Starting with Section 1, Defining True Community Needs. Because honestly, if you're not starting here, your whole project is probably flawed from day one. Let's break this down. A true community need isn't just a vague feeling or a guess. It's an actual, measurable gap between a current state and an ideal state. And according to the source material, we usually evaluate this in a couple of ways. First, there's normative need. That's when we use a shared societal standard, like, say, the World Health Organization's baseline for daily clean water. Then we have relative or comparative need. This is where we measure the inequalities between different areas to figure out who is being critically underserved compared to their neighbors. Make sense? But here's where we have to be super careful. There is a huge difference between a true community need and a mere want. You might have a town where half the people want a community garden and the other half want a recreation center. Those are competing wants. And honestly, there's an even bigger trap in international development. It's the risk of donors pushing top-down package solutions, pre-designed interventions, like dropping a generic water pump into a village. It might look fantastic in a boardroom pitch, but it totally fails to address the actual nuanced gaps that specific community is experiencing.
Which brings us right into Section 2, Frameworks for Strategic Change. This is where we peel back the next layer of the onion.
Let's move to and see how this builds. To structure a solution, we use the classic logic model. Think of it as a linear chain of events. You start with your inputs, that's your funding and your staff. You use those inputs to run activities, like hosting training workshops. Those activities produce tangible outputs, like newly certified local nurses. That in turn leads to outcomes, which would be better immediate healthcare in the area. And finally, if the logic actually holds up, you achieve your long-term impact, like fundamentally lowered regional mortality rates. And this 7-step results-based management model is brilliant because it illustrates exactly where an NGO has direct control and where that control kind of fades out. Down to the bottom, with inputs and activities, the organization calls all the shots. But as you move up into community reactions, you really only have direct influence. And by the time you reach the very top, that ultimate socioeconomic impact, your influence is highly indirect. An NGO can absolutely build a clinic, but improving an entire region's long-term health, that depends on massive outside factors like political stability and broader economic shifts. All right, moving on to Section 3, the project cycle stages. So how does all this theory look chronologically on the ground? Well, these are the ABCs of strategic planning. A is assessing where you are now, taking a hard look at your current resources and structures. B is defining where you want to be, your vision and your goals. And C is formulating the operational strategy to actually get you there. It's not a one-and-done thing, it's a continuous, dynamic cycle that keeps the organization grounded while pushing toward its mission. And executing that strategy, it is a massive juggling act. You've got these essential project management components to balance: scope, time, budget, quality, team, risk, stakeholders, communication, procurement, and atmosphere management. You can't just fixate on the budget and completely ignore stakeholder communication. All these pieces have to synergize perfectly to avoid overlaps and make sure the project actually works out. Okay, Section 4, Participatory Design and Power. This is where I want us to take a critical pause and look at the ethics of who is actually driving these projects. Now, what's really interesting about this approach, participatory rural appraisal, or PRA, is that it attempts to put the community squarely in the driver's seat. Instead of an NGO just dropping in and dictating a solution from on high, they act as facilitators.
They help the community map out their own resources, identify their own challenges, and set their own priorities.
But we've got to look at this critically. Listen to this quote from the source literature. The goals and objectives of NGOs reflect a desire to reduce global inequalities, yet the practice of partnership can exacerbate the very inequalities that NGOs seek to eliminate. That's a pretty profound warning, right? Academics are pointing out that tools like PRA can sometimes totally gloss over complex local power dynamics. If you aren't extremely careful, a so-called participatory meeting can end up just giving a megaphone to local elites while completely silencing marginalized groups. And suddenly, you're just maintaining top-down control, but dressing it up as partnership.
So how do we fix that blind spot? That brings us to Section 5, Integrating Crucial Perspectives.
To ensure we aren't just reinforcing existing power structures, NGOs have to actively weave specific lenses into their project design. The sources call out 4 big ones: gender dynamics, disability inclusion, conflict sensitivity, and embedded inequalities. Think about it. Embedded inequalities can literally silence women, people of color, or disabled persons within civil society itself. You can't just host a town hall and assume everyone's voice is being heard equally. These lenses have to be deliberately engineered into the framework to guarantee true equity. And this is absolutely critical when we look at the conflict lens, especially in extreme environments. Navigating operations in active war zones brings on unimaginable stressors. NGOs are dealing with severe structural, systemic, and interpersonal challenges every single day. Trying to deliver life-saving services while keeping your personnel and your beneficiaries safe, that demands a highly adaptable, incredibly sensitive approach to conflict. Which finally brings us to Section 6, Rights and Community Ownership. So the crucial point is this major ethical shift. We are talking about moving from basic welfare provision to rights-based approaches, driven by something called local pull and institutional empowerment. For development to be truly sustainable, it requires a massive pivot. We have to move away from just dropping off supplies and move toward establishing enforceable rights. It's about actually transferring power over to local institutions, so the community creates its own pull for services. They start demanding and managing their own development, long after the NGO packs up and goes home. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative question to chew on today. If the ultimate goal of an NGO is to genuinely empower a community and transfer ownership, should a truly successful project eventually make the NGO itself obsolete? Seriously, think about that. It really forces us to examine what sustainable impact and community ownership actually mean. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I hope this deep dive helped you wrap your head around these concepts. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.